My name is Valerie, and I'm 36 years old. If someone had told me 10 years ago that my son would one day be the source of my deepest heartbreak, I would have laughed and called them crazy. Ethan was my world, my miracle, my reason to wake up every morning. His father left when Ethan was just 4, and from that moment on, it was just the two of us against everything life threw our way. I worked days at a small diner and nights cleaning offices just to keep the lights on. I was exhausted most of the time, but seeing Ethan smile when he kicked his first football made every ache disappear. He was obsessed with the game from the very beginning. I still remember the old, scuffed-up ball he used to carry everywhere. He'd sleep with it sometimes, like a security blanket. As the years passed, his talent grew, and people started noticing him. By the time he was in high school, Ethan was one of the best players in the county. Coaches praised him, other parents admired him, and I just stood in the background, proud beyond words. Every Friday night, I'd be in the stands, rain or shine, shouting his name until my throat hurt. I made him sandwiches before practice, ironed his jersey, and taped his ankle when he sprained it. I didn't have much to give, but I gave everything I could. Then something changed. When he turned 16, he started hanging out with kids whose parents drove luxury cars and wore designer clothes. Suddenly, my second-hand minivan embarrassed him. He'd ask me to drop him off a block away from school, pretending he didn't see me waving goodbye. I told myself it was just teenage behavior, that he'd grow out of it. But a mother always knows when something deeper is wrong. At home, our conversations became short and sharp. "How was your day?" That would earn me a shrug. "Want dinner?" Was met with a mumbled, "I'm not hungry." He spent hours on his phone, laughing at things I wasn't part of. Sometimes I'd peek into his room, and he'd hide his screen like he didn't want me to see who he was talking to. I felt him slipping away inch by inch, but I kept telling myself he'd come back around. When the regional championship was announced, I thought it might be a chance to reconnect. Ethan's team had worked hard all season, and he was their star player. The whole town was buzzing about it. I decided I'd surprise him, show up early, bring him a good luck snack, and hold a banner I'd made myself that said, "Go Ethan, Mom believes in you." It wasn't fancy, just bright letters painted on cardboard, but I poured my heart into it. That day, I woke up extra early, braided my hair, put on my cleanest blouse, and took the bus to the stadium. I wanted to look nice for him. The stands filled up quickly, parents, students, cheerleaders, all buzzing with excitement. When Ethan's team ran onto the field, the crowd erupted. I spotted him immediately, number 22. My boy, strong and confident. My heart swelled. I waved the banner proudly and shouted his name. For a moment, our eyes met. But instead of smiling, his face hardened. His friends nudged him, laughing, and he turned away like he didn't even know me. My heart sank, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just nervous. When halftime came, I saw him walking toward the benches. I grabbed the water bottle I'd brought and hurried down the bleachers. "Hey, sweetheart," I said softly, handing it out. He turned, eyes flashing, and snapped, "Mom! What are you doing here? Don't you get it? You're embarrassing me! You're nobody here!" Everything around me went silent. The noise of the crowd blurred into a dull hum. My hands shook as the water bottle slipped from my fingers and rolled away. Parents nearby stared. Some looked shocked, others whispered. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. Ethan turned back to his teammates like nothing had happened, laughing nervously, pretending he didn't care. I stood, frozen for a moment, my heart beating in my ears. Then, quietly, I turned and walked up the bleachers, each step heavier than the last. When I reached the exit, the crowd erupted again as the second half began. I didn't look back. My son was still out there, playing the game he loved, but for the first time, I realized he no longer saw me as part of it. That night, under those bright stadium lights, my world collapsed in front of hundreds. The noise of the crowd couldn't drown out the sound of my son's voice calling me nobody. The rest of that night felt like a dream I couldn't wake from, except it wasn't a dream at all. I walked home from the stadium, my hands trembling, the roar of the crowd still echoing in my ears. Every word Ethan said replayed in my mind like a cruel recording. "You're embarrassing me. You're nobody here." I kept hearing it, over and over, until it became more than a sentence, it became a wound. When I reached our small apartment, I sat on the couch in silence, still holding the banner I had made for him. The letters, bold and bright, now looked childish. The paint had smudged where my hands had shaken, and I realized I'd been clutching it so tightly that my palms were stained with blue and red. I folded it carefully, almost as if I could hide the pain in its creases. Hours passed before I heard Ethan's key in the door. He came in laughing, still in his uniform, his hair wet with sweat. "Hey, Mom," he said casually, dropping his bag by the door. He didn't even notice my swollen eyes or the silence hanging heavy in the room. I wanted to scream, to ask him how he could humiliate me like that, but my throat locked up. Instead, I just nodded and said softly, "There's food on the stove." He didn't thank me. He never did anymore. He ate, showered, and went straight to his room, humming under his breath like nothing had happened. The sound of his laughter earlier at the stadium kept playing in my head. That laughter wasn't the sound of my little boy, it was a stranger's voice. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, the coldness in his eyes when he looked at me, the mockery in his tone. I tried to remind myself he was just a teenager, but that excuse didn't soften the sting. I had spent 16 years being everything for him, mother, father, provider, and in one moment, he erased me. The next morning, I made breakfast out of habit pancakes, his favorite, but he didn't come out of his room. By the time I left for work, his plate sat untouched. At the diner, I smiled for customers, poured coffee, and acted as though my world hadn't fallen apart. My coworker, Brenda, noticed the way my hands shook as I poured a cup. "Val, you okay? You look pale," she said. I forced a smile. "Just tired," I lied. She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me, but she didn't push. When I came home that evening, Ethan was sprawled on the couch, headphones in, laughing at something on his phone. "How was practice?" I asked carefully. He didn't even look up. "Fine," he said. One word. That was all. I swallowed the ache and went to my room. I didn't want to argue. I didn't have the energy anymore. Days turned into weeks. The incident at the stadium became a secret I carried alone. I told no one. But every time I saw the other football parents at the diner, I felt their eyes linger on me just a second too long. They knew. They'd seen it happen. Shame clung to me like a shadow. One evening, as I was folding laundry, I overheard Ethan on the phone in his room. "Yeah, my mom's always doing weird stuff. She doesn't get it," he said, laughing. My heart sank. I sat there with one of his jerseys in my hands and felt something inside me crack. I wasn't angry anymore, I was numb. That weekend, there was another football game. I didn't go. For the first time since Ethan started playing, I stayed home. I told myself I needed to work late, but really, I couldn't bear to risk another moment like that one. When Ethan came home, sweaty and triumphant, he asked, "You didn't come?" I met his eyes for a moment. "No," I said simply. "I had things to do." He looked confused, maybe even a little disappointed, but he shrugged it off. That night, I stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes, staring out the window at the quiet street. I thought about how far we'd drifted from each other. The boy who once hugged me after every game now barely saw me as a person. I went to bed early, exhausted from pretending everything was fine. As I lay there in the dark, I realized something important. The moment he called me nobody, I stopped recognizing myself too. That night, when Ethan came home smiling, something inside me broke for good. Every time I looked at him, I heard that word echoing in my mind, nobody. The days after that night felt like walking through fog. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same anymore. Ethan still came and went as he pleased, tossing his bag on the floor, eating when he wanted, ignoring me when he didn't need anything. Yet every glance, every silence between us, carried the weight of what he'd said. I tried to move on, to convince myself it was just teenage rebellion. But the truth was uglier. It wasn't just what he said, it was how easily he said it. There was no hesitation, no flicker of guilt in his eyes that night. That haunted me more than the words themselves. At work, I went through the motions like a ghost. I'd smile at customers, refill their coffee cups, and count the tips with hands that still trembled sometimes. My manager noticed and asked if I needed a few days off, but I shook my head. I couldn't afford to stop working, and I couldn't afford to sit at home with my thoughts either. The only time I felt any peace was when I was too tired to think. Ethan's behavior didn't improve. If anything, he seemed to drift further away. He'd leave early in the morning and come home late at night. Sometimes he smelled faintly of cheap cologne and bonfire smoke, the kind that clings to teenagers who think the world belongs to them. When I asked where he'd been, he'd shrug or say, "Out." Always. Out. One evening, I tried to talk to him over dinner. "Ethan, we need to talk about what happened at the game," I said softly. He didn't even look up from his plate. "Mom, it's over. Can we not make this a big thing?" "It was a big thing," I said, trying to steady my voice. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone." He cut me off sharply. "Why do you care what people think? You're always so sensitive." I froze. Sensitive. That was his word for my pain. I felt the heat rise to my face, but I bit my tongue and just nodded. "You're right," I whispered. "Maybe I am." He finished eating, grabbed his phone, and disappeared into his room without another word. I sat there, staring at the two empty plates, listening to his muffled laughter through the wall as he talked to his friends. Somewhere between the clinking of dishes and the hum of his voice, something inside me went still. That night, I pulled out an old photo album from under the couch. Pictures of Ethan when he was little, missing front teeth, muddy sneakers, his tiny arms around my neck after every game. I traced my fingers over the glossy pages, trying to remember that version of him. The one who used to call me the best mom ever. The one who believed I could fix anything with a hug. Where had that boy gone? At the diner the next morning, my friend Lisa noticed the sadness in my eyes. "Val, you've been off lately," she said gently as we refilled the sugar containers. "Everything okay with Ethan?" I hesitated, then forced a small smile. "He's just growing up." Lisa nodded, but her eyes softened. Growing up shouldn't mean growing cold. Her words stayed with me the rest of the day. That night, I watched Ethan through the crack of his door as he played a video game, shouting and laughing with friends online. He looked so alive, so carefree, while I felt like a ghost haunting my own home. I realized I'd spent years pouring myself into him, his meals, his clothes, his dreams, until there was nothing left of me outside of Mom. When he called me nobody, maybe he was just saying what I'd made myself become. For the first time in years, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I searched for painting tutorials online. Art had always been my escape before life got heavy. I ordered a cheap set of brushes and paints that night. Maybe I couldn't change Ethan yet, but I could start remembering who I was. In the weeks that followed, I stopped asking him where he was going. I stopped waiting up for him. I stopped begging for scraps of attention. He noticed the shift, though he never mentioned it. Once, he walked into the living room and saw me painting. "Didn't know you still did that," he said quietly. I just smiled and replied, "I'm starting again." He nodded and went to his room. That small exchange was the first moment of peace we'd had in months. I didn't realize it then, but life was already setting its pieces in motion. Sometimes, when you stop chasing someone's love, life finds a way to make them see what they've lost. But life was about to show Ethan how it feels to lose the cheers he lived for. Karma has its own way of showing up sometimes right on the field. The next few weeks passed in a blur of silence and tension. Ethan and I hardly spoke, but something in the air between us had shifted. He wasn't cruel anymore, just distant. I'd catch him watching me sometimes when he thought I wasn't looking, maybe wondering why I wasn't nagging him like before. I'd simply smile faintly and go back to whatever I was doing. For once, I wasn't chasing after him, begging for closeness that wasn't there. Then came the semifinals. Ethan's team had made it further than anyone expected. The whole town buzzed with excitement, the school gym filled with banners, and everyone talked about how he'd lead the team to victory. Everyone, except me. I didn't plan on going this time. The thought of sitting in those stands again, surrounded by the same faces that had witnessed my humiliation, made my stomach twist. That Friday, while the entire town seemed to be heading toward the stadium, I stayed home. I put on an old t-shirt, tied my hair back, and painted. The sound of the brush against canvas calmed me in a way I hadn't felt in years. Still, part of me couldn't stop thinking about him out there. The roar of the crowd, the pressure on his shoulders. I wondered if he looked for me in the stands. I doubted it. Around 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a notification from the local sports page. I almost ignored it until I saw Ethan's name in the headline. Eagles lose in shocking final minute. I clicked it. The post showed a clip of the final play. Ethan had the ball, he could have passed it for an easy win, but instead, he'd gone for the glory himself. He missed. The other team scored seconds later. The comments were merciless. Classic selfish play. He cost us the game. Thought he was the star, guess not. My heart clenched. I wanted to protect him, to defend him the way I always had, but then I remembered the night he'd turned his back on me in front of everyone, and I couldn't help but think, maybe this is how life teaches humility. When Ethan came home later, I heard the door slam. His footsteps thundered down the hall, and he threw his bag against the wall with a heavy thud. I stayed quiet, listening. A moment later, his door shut hard enough to rattle the picture frames. I waited a while before gently knocking. Ethan, go away, he snapped. His voice cracked, the same way it had when he was a child on the verge of tears. I wanted to open the door, to hold him like I used to, but I didn't. I just stood there for a few seconds, my hand resting on the doorknob, before walking away. The next morning, he didn't come out of his room. When he finally did, his eyes were red and swollen. He didn't say a word to me. He grabbed his keys and left without breakfast. Later, while scrolling online, I saw pictures of his teammates celebrating without him. There were memes, jokes kids could be so cruel. I wanted to hate those kids, but I couldn't. Because, deep down, I knew this was life doing what I couldn't, teaching Ethan a lesson in humility and empathy. The same crowd that once cheered for him now laughed at him. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what he needed to understand how I'd felt standing in those stands weeks ago. That evening, when he finally returned, he looked defeated. They all hate me, he muttered, slumping onto the couch. Everyone's making fun of me online, even my friends. I put down my cup of tea and said quietly, then they were never really your friends. He didn't respond. He just stared at the floor, lost. I could see his pride slowly crumbling, and it wasn't satisfying, it was painful. Watching your child break, even when you know they deserve the lesson, is a kind of heartbreak only a parent can understand. After a long silence, I said softly, Ethan, sometimes when life knocks you down, it's not to destroy you, it's to make you see who you are without all the noise. He didn't look at me, but I saw a tear fall. It wasn't victory I felt. It was a quiet ache, mixed with a flicker of hope that maybe this was the beginning of change. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the faint sound of rain tapping against the window. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible, not because Ethan had learned his lesson, but because I finally stopped measuring my worth by how much he appreciated me. But that was just the beginning of his downfall and my awakening. When arrogance fades, pain takes its place. After the loss, the air in our house turned heavy and quiet. Ethan moved like a shadow through the rooms, silent, withdrawn, and avoiding my eyes. The boy who once strutted through the door, bragging about every goal, now barely spoke a word. I wanted to feel sorry for him, and part of me did, but another part knew this silence wasn't just sadness, it was the beginning of understanding. For the first few days, I gave him space. I didn't press, didn't ask questions. He barely touched his meals, spending hours in his room scrolling through his phone. Sometimes I'd hear muffled sounds from behind the door, his friends' laughter, followed by silence. I knew what was happening. They'd turned on him. The same boys who had built him up were now tearing him down online. The same crowd that cheered was now pointing fingers. By the end of the week, I found his uniform stuffed at the bottom of the laundry basket, wrinkled and forgotten. The sight of it made me ache. That jersey had once been his pride, the symbol of all his dreams. Now it looked like just another piece of dirty laundry. One evening, I finally broke the silence. "Ethan, honey," I said gently from the kitchen, "you should talk to your coach, see if there's a chance to make things right." He looked up from his phone with tired eyes. "What's the point? Everyone hates me now." "Not everyone," I said softly. "People move on, but you can't let this define you." He scoffed. "You wouldn't understand." I felt the sting of those words, the same dismissive tone that had hurt me before. But instead of arguing, I took a deep breath. "You're right," I said quietly. "Maybe I don't understand what it's like to have a crowd turn on you, but I do understand what it feels. I like to be embarrassed by someone you love." That made him pause. His eyes flickered with something, maybe guilt, maybe realization, but he said nothing. He just grabbed his keys and left. Later that night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, my half-empty cup of tea gone cold. I realized something had shifted in me too. For years, I had built my world around making sure Ethan never faced hardship. I'd smoothed every bump, shielded him from every storm. But maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I had made it too easy for him to believe he was untouchable. The next morning his coach called. "Mrs. Parker," he said, his voice kind but firm. "Ethan's been skipping practice. I think he's taking the loss harder than he lets on. But he's a good kid, he just needs to learn humility." I sighed. "I think he's learning that lesson right now, coach. Maybe the hard way." He chuckled softly. "Aren't those the lessons that stick?" When Ethan came home that evening, I told him about the call. He rolled his eyes. "I'm not going back. They don't want me there." "Maybe not yet," I replied. "But walking away won't fix it." He slammed the refrigerator door and muttered, "Why do you always have to make everything a lesson?" I met his gaze calmly, because life does the same thing to all of us. "I'm just trying to make sure you survive yours." For a long moment, we just stared at each other, me, tired but steady. Him, angry but lost. Then he stormed off, his footsteps echoing down the hall. The old me would have chased after him, desperate to fix things. This time, I didn't. I just let him go. Over the next week, Ethan's rebellion deepened. He skipped classes, came home late, and ignored his responsibilities. The school called twice about his attendance. I listened, thanked them, and didn't make excuses for him. When he came home the second time, I handed him the warning slip. "You'll need to sort this out. Check yourself," I said simply. His eyes widened. "You're not going to call them?" "No, you got yourself into this. You can get yourself out." He looked at me like I was someone new, someone he couldn't manipulate with guilt or tears. Maybe, in that moment, he realized his mother wasn't the pushover she used to be. That weekend, he stayed in his room for most of the day. I painted quietly in the living room, the soft scratch of my brush filling the silence. Late that night, when I finally turned off the lights, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something in my chest tightened as I answered. "Mrs. Parker?" a voice said. "This is Officer Daniels. Your son's been in a car accident." My blood ran cold. The mug I was holding slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. Then, one late night, the phone rang, and my heart stopped. "Mom, I need you!" Ethan cried over the phone, and I heard real fear this time. I didn't even remember grabbing my keys. One second I was standing in the kitchen with glass scattered at my feet. And the next I was speeding down the rain-slick streets, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The police officer had said Ethan was in an accident, minor injuries. He'd assured me, but those words didn't matter. Until I saw my son breathing in front of me, nothing else would. The hospital lights were harsh and sterile. The air thick with disinfectant and worry. I ran through the corridor, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the receptionist directing me. When I reached the emergency ward, I saw him, Ethan, sitting on a hospital bed with a bandage around his wrist and a scrape on his cheek. His face was pale, his eyes swollen and red. The second he saw me, His tough facade cracked. "Mom," his voice trembled. I didn't mean to scare you." I rushed to his side, wrapping my arms around him. He flinched at first, then melted into the hug like the scared little boy he used to be. I could feel him shaking. "What happened?" I whispered. He swallowed hard. "It was after practice. Some of the guys wanted to go out, celebrate, even though we lost. I told them I'd drive. I wasn't paying attention, Mom. I just wanted to forget for a while." His voice broke on the last word. The car skidded. "My friend Caleb, he's worse. They said he might not walk right again." Tears burned in my eyes. I didn't know whether to comfort him or scream. "Ethan," I whispered, pulling back just enough to look him in the face. "You could have died." He dropped his gaze, shame flooding his expression. "I know." A doctor came in to check his vitals, giving me a sympathetic glance before quietly leaving us alone again. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The hum of machines and distant footsteps filled the silence. I reached for his hand and felt his pulse still racing. For the first time in years, he didn't pull away. When the nurse finally said he could go home, I helped him sign the papers. The ride back was quiet. The rain had stopped, but the world still looked gray and tired. I glanced at him a few times. He sat slumped in the passenger seat, staring out the window. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of his mistakes had finally crushed the arrogance he'd worn for so long. When we got home, he muttered, "Thanks," and disappeared into his room. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the sound of his door closing. Then I walked to my own room, sat on the edge of the bed, and finally let myself cry. It wasn't just relief, it was grief for everything we'd lost. The next morning, Ethan stayed home from school. He didn't ask to go anywhere, didn't touch his phone, didn't even eat. He just sat by the window, staring out at the rain. Every now and then, he'd run his hand over his bandaged wrist, like it was a reminder of how close he'd come to losing everything. In the days that followed, I noticed a shift in him. He didn't talk much, but when he did, he started helping me with small things, taking out the trash, washing his dishes, feeding the neighbor's cat when she was out of town. They weren't big gestures, but they were something. The arrogance that had once filled the house was gone, replaced by quiet guilt. One evening, I walked into his room to check on him. He was sitting on the bed, staring at a framed picture of him and Caleb from an old game. His shoulders trembled. "He might lose his scholarship," he whispered. "Because of me." I sat beside him. "Accidents happen, Ethan." He shook his head. "Not this kind. I was being stupid. I wasn't thinking. I wanted everyone to think I was okay, that I wasn't broken after the game." He looked at me with tear-filled eyes. "But I was, Mom. I was broken." I didn't know what to say, so I just reached out and put my arm around him. He leaned into me, resting his head on my shoulder like he hadn't done since he was 10. For the first time in a long time, we sat together in silence, and it wasn't strained, it was healing. When he finally spoke again, his voice was small. "I'm sorry for what I said at the game. For everything." I stroked his hair gently, my own tears falling. "I know," I whispered. "Just make sure you never forget how this feels. Let it change you." He nodded slowly, his eyes heavy with understanding. That night, I stood at his doorway watching him sleep. His face looked peaceful, boyish again. For the first time, I saw hope in that stillness. Maybe this was the lesson he needed, not from me, but from life itself. But going back to school was far worse than any injury. The same crowd that once cheered for him now laughed behind his back. When Ethan went back to school, I could see the tension in his shoulders even as he stood by the door adjusting his backpack. His wrist was still wrapped, and his face had that pale, uneasy look of someone stepping into a place that no longer felt safe. I wanted to tell him it would be okay, that people forget things quickly, but that would have been a lie. Teenagers never forget, especially when they smell weakness. I watched from the window as he walked down the street, his steps slower than usual. For years he had walked with the easy swagger of a boy who knew he was admired. That morning, he looked like he was walking through a storm. That afternoon, when he came home, I knew before he even opened his mouth that it had been bad. He dropped his backpack by the door and sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the floor. "They all hate me," he muttered. "They called me reckless, said I ruined everything." I sat down across from him. "Ethan." He cut me off, his voice breaking. "Even coach won't look at me the same. He said he doesn't want me back on the team this season. Everyone's acting like I'm some kind of joke." I stayed quiet. There was nothing I could say that would erase what he was feeling. I wanted to protect him, but part of me knew this pain was his turning point. The days that followed were cruel. He'd come home angry, humiliated, and quieter than ever. I overheard him on the phone once, begging a friend to hang out, only to get brushed off with excuses. Later I saw his phone light up with a social media post, memes and cruel jokes, using his missed game clip and the accident as punchlines. His face went blank. He deleted his accounts that same night. Watching him crumble was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Every instinct in me screamed to fix it, to call the school, to tell those kids to leave him alone, but something in my heart told me this was his lesson to live, not mine to fight. So instead, I made sure he came home to warmth, to a meal, to silence when he needed it, and small conversation when he didn't. One evening, I found him sitting in the dark living room, the TV off, his head in his hands. "Ethan," I said softly. "It's okay to be hurt. You don't have to hide it." He looked up at me, eyes rimmed red. "You don't get it, Mom. Everyone used to look up to me. Now they just pity me. I feel like I don't exist anymore." I walked over and sat beside him. "I do get it," I said quietly. "You remember when you told me I was nobody? That's exactly how I felt that night. Invisible. Small. Like I didn't belong anywhere." He froze, his lips parting slightly, but no words came out. I could see his realization sinking in. "I didn't mean it," he whispered finally. "I know," I said gently. "But you did say it, and it changed me. Just like this, what's happening now, it's changing you." We sat there for a long time, just breathing in the stillness. For once, there was no anger between us, just raw truth. After that night, he began helping around the house again without me asking. He washed the dishes, took out the trash, even fixed a loose cabinet handle. They were small things, but I noticed. One evening, I found him sweeping the porch while humming under his breath. When he saw me, he smiled faintly. It was the first real smile I'd seen in months. Still, his spirit wasn't whole. At school, the whispers followed him. The teachers treated him differently, gentler, like a fragile glass that might shatter. I could tell that kindness made him feel worse, not better. He wanted respect, not sympathy. Then, one night, he came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes. "Mom," he said softly, "do you think I can ever fix what I broke?" I turned off the water and faced him. "You can't change the past, Ethan. But you can decide what kind of person you'll be from now on." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I don't want to be that person anymore, the one who hurts people." For the first time, I believed him. He wasn't just sorry for the consequences, he was sorry for the pain he'd caused. There was a sincerity in his voice I hadn't heard since he was a little boy. That night, before bed, I peeked into his room. He was sitting at his desk, writing something in a notebook, his face calm. I didn't ask what it was, but a quiet peace filled the house that hadn't been there in a long time. And that night, he made me a promise that would change both our lives. Redemption doesn't happen in a single moment, it happens in small choices. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of dishes clinking in the kitchen. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. When I walked out, Ethan was standing at the sink, washing the breakfast plates. He looked awkward, like he wasn't sure how to act. "You didn't have to do that," I said softly. He shrugged, eyes fixed on the soapy water. "I wanted to," he muttered. That small exchange, so ordinary, yet so unexpected, made my heart ache in the best way. Over the following weeks, Ethan began to change in ways I couldn't ignore. The anger that used to sit heavy in his voice was gone. He didn't slam doors anymore. didn't roll his eyes when I asked him questions. He even started going to school early, though not for classes. When I finally asked where he went, he said, "The community center. Coach told me they need help with the kids' league." I was surprised. "You're volunteering?" He nodded. "Just helping out, setting up cones, running drills, stuff like that." I smiled. "That's good, Ethan. That's really good." Something in his tone told me this wasn't about football anymore. It was about finding a place where he could matter again, where the cheers didn't come from fame, but from helping someone else. That weekend, I decided to see it for myself. I walked to the community field quietly, standing behind the chain-link fence. Ethan was there, jogging alongside a group of little kids, showing them how to pass the ball. He laughed when one of them tripped and helped him back up. It was the kind of laugh I hadn't heard in so long, genuine, unguarded, and kind. Watching him, I felt tears welling up. He was finally learning what I'd always wanted him to understand, that strength isn't in being admired, it's in being good. When he saw me afterward, his face flushed. "You watched?" "I did," I said with a small smile. "You were great." He rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed but pleased. "It's different, you know? Working with them. They don't care if you win or lose, they just want someone to show up." His words hit me deep. For years, I had been the one showing up, no matter what, and now, he was beginning to do the same for others. Over the next few weeks, our home began to feel alive again. He'd tell me stories about the kids, how one named Dylan kept calling him Coach E, or how a little girl named Maya scored her first goal and screamed like she'd won the World Cup. He talked with warmth I hadn't heard in years. And when he smiled, I saw glimpses of the boy he used to be. One evening, while we were having dinner, he put his fork down and looked at me. "Mom," he said quietly, "I've been meaning to tell you something." I looked up, curious. "What is it?" "I'm sorry. Not just for that night at the game, but for everything I said afterward. I was angry, not at you, but at myself. You didn't deserve any of it." My throat tightened. For months I'd imagined hearing those words, but when they finally came, I didn't know what to say. "Thank you," I whispered. "I forgave you a long time ago. I was just waiting for you to forgive yourself." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I think I'm starting to." From that day, something shifted between us. We became more like friends than just mother and son. We'd cook together, sometimes paint side by side. He was terrible at it, but he tried anyway. I'd tease him, and he'd laugh. For the first time in years, laughter filled the house again, not anger. Then, one afternoon, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Ethan's phone buzzed. He checked it, and his eyes widened. "It's Coach," he said. "He wants to meet tomorrow." I smiled. "Maybe he wants to thank you for helping out." He shook his head, nervous. He said it's about an opportunity. When he went to the meeting the next day, I couldn't focus on anything. I painted, cleaned, even rearranged the furniture just to pass the time. By the time he came home, I was pacing near the window. He opened the door, grinning wider than I'd seen in years. "Mom, you won't believe this," he said breathlessly. "Coach wants me to assist with the youth program full-time. He said I've changed, that I'd be a great mentor for the younger players." I stood frozen for a moment, my heart swelling with pride. "Ethan, that's incredible," he smiled, eyes soft with humility. "I think I finally get it now. What matters, it's not the cheers or the trophies, it's being someone worth looking up to." I walked over and pulled him into a hug. "I always knew you could be." The very man who once benched him showed up at our door with an offer. When the coach asked if Ethan wanted another shot, I held my breath. The next morning, Ethan left early for his first official day as an assistant coach at the youth program. He was nervous, though he tried to hide it. I could tell by how many times he checked his watch and retied his sneakers. "You'll do great," I said as he stood by the door. He gave me a small, uncertain smile. "I hope so." When the door closed behind him, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, just thinking about how far we'd come. The boy who once shouted at me in front of hundreds now spent his mornings teaching 8-year-olds how to tie their cleats. Life had a strange way of balancing things. By the time I walked down to the field that afternoon, the sun was beginning to dip low in the sky. I stood by the fence again, just like I had months ago, but this time the air felt lighter. The laughter of children carried across the grass, and in the middle of it all was Ethan running drills, cheering, giving high fives. He looked alive, grounded. Coach Turner, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a gruff voice, stood near me with his arms folded. "You must be Valerie," he said with a knowing grin. I nodded, smiling. "That obvious?" He chuckled. "He talks about you all the time now. Says he's lucky you never gave up on him." My chest tightened with emotion. There were moments I wanted to, I admitted softly. "But I guess love doesn't work that way." The coach nodded. "He's come a long way. Most kids don't bounce back after falling that hard. But yours did. And he's helping others do the same." I watched as Ethan crouched to tie a little boy's shoelace, patting his shoulder before sending him back into the game. The kids adored him. I could tell by the way they clung to every word he said. When the practice ended, Ethan spotted me by the fence. His face lit up, and for the first time in so long, there was no shame in his expression, only pride. "Hey, Mom," he called, jogging over. His shirt was soaked with sweat, but his smile was wide. "Did you see that last goal? The little one, Noah, scored it all on his own." "I did," I said, laughing. "You were great out there," he shrugged, looking down shyly. "They make it easy to love the game again." As we walked home together, the air smelled faintly of cut grass and summer. "Coach said you're doing really well," I told him. "Yeah," he said, hands in his pockets. He even mentioned maybe recommending me for a coaching scholarship next year. I stopped mid-step. "A scholarship?" He nodded, smiling, nervously. "I don't want to get ahead of myself, but it's possible." For a moment I couldn't speak. Pride swelled inside me until I thought my heart might burst. "Ethan, that's amazing." He looked at me with quiet sincerity. "You were right, Mom. Losing everything was the best thing that could have happened to me. It made me realize who I was becoming and who I didn't want to be." That night, he cooked dinner, spaghetti, his favorite, and we sat at the table talking like old friends. He asked about my art, something he hadn't done in years. I told him I'd started painting again, and he smiled. "You should sell them. Seriously, you're good." I laughed. "Maybe someday." "Someday should start now," he said, twirling his fork. "You've spent your whole life doing things for me. Maybe it's time to do something for yourself." His words caught me off guard. I realized then how much he'd grown. He wasn't just my son anymore, he was becoming a man who understood the value of others, not just himself. In the following weeks, Ethan threw himself into his work. He organized community matches, helped struggling kids with their confidence, and even started tutoring one boy who had trouble reading. Every night, he'd come home exhausted but fulfilled. The house that once echoed with anger now buzzed with laughter and conversation. One evening, as I was cleaning the dishes, he came in holding his phone. "Coach sent me this," he said, handing it to me. It was a photo of him kneeling with the kids after practice, their arms wrapped around him, all of them grinning. The caption read, "Sometimes the best players become the best teachers." I stared at the picture, my throat tightening. "You've become everything I hoped you'd be," I whispered. He smiled, a little embarrassed. "I couldn't have without you, Mom." And in that moment, I realized something. All the years I thought I was losing him, he'd just been finding his way back. For the first time in years, peace filled our home, not the quiet kind born of sadness, but the warm, steady kind built from forgiveness. Then came the email that would change everything for him and for me. The scholarship email popped up on Ethan's screen, and he froze. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when everything changed again. I was folding laundry on the couch when Ethan's startled voice echoed from his room. "Mom, come here quick." His tone wasn't panicked, but it was urgent enough to make my heart skip a beat. I rushed down the hall, my mind racing with possibilities. He was sitting at his desk, staring at his laptop screen like he'd seen a ghost. "What's wrong?" I asked. He looked up at me, his voice trembling slightly. "It's not bad. It's good, really good." He turned the screen toward me. There it was, an email from Oakwood University, the same college whose football team he'd admired for years. I read the first line out loud. "We're impressed by your leadership in youth athletics and your personal growth story. We'd like to invite you to interview for a scholarship in our sports education program." My hands flew to my mouth. "Ethan! This is incredible!" He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I don't get it, Mom. Why me? After everything I've done?" I smiled softly. "Maybe because you've changed, and maybe they see what I've always seen in you." He exhaled slowly, shaking his head in disbelief. "I can't believe this is happening." Over the next few days, the house buzzed with nervous energy. Ethan spent hours preparing for the interview, jotting notes on index cards, rehearsing answers in front of the mirror. I'd peek in occasionally, offering little bits of encouragement. "Just be honest," I told him. "You've lived the kind of story they can't teach in a classroom." The morning of the interview he came, out of his room wearing a neatly ironed shirt and a tie that was slightly crooked. "Let me fix that," I said, stepping close to adjust it. For a brief moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who needed me to tie his shoelaces before every game. "There," I said with a smile. "Perfect." He gave me a nervous grin. "Wish me luck." "You don't need luck," I replied. "You've already done the hard part." That afternoon, when he returned, his face told me everything before he even spoke. "How'd it go?" I asked. He smiled. "I told them everything, Mom. Not just about coaching the kids, but about the mistakes I made. The arrogance. The accident. How I treated you. They didn't even ask. I just told them. It felt good to say it out loud." I blinked back tears. "That's brave, Ethan. Most people hide their shame, you faced yours." He nodded slowly. "They said they admired my honesty. One of them even said it showed real maturity." For the next week, we waited. Every email notification made my stomach twist. Then, one evening while I was cooking dinner, I heard Ethan shout, "Mom, come here!" The excitement in his voice made my heart race. I ran into his room again, and there it was. He'd been accepted. Full scholarship. I froze, the smell of sautéing onions still clinging to my clothes. "Full?" I whispered. He nodded, eyes shining. "Full. They said they believe in second chances and want me to share my story with their freshman athletes." The tears came before I could stop them. I hugged him tightly, laughing and crying all at once. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered. So proud." For the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't pull away from my embrace. He hugged me back, hard. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. You're the reason I kept going." A week later, Oakwood University invited him to speak at their orientation event as a new scholarship recipient. He told me. I felt that familiar twinge of anxiety the last time I'd been at one of his big public moments. He'd broken my heart. "You should come," he said softly. "Please, I want you there." I hesitated. "Ethan, are you sure?" "It's your day," he interrupted gently. "Mom, it's our day." The following weekend, we drove to the university together. The stadium loomed large against the bright morning sky, just like the one where everything had gone wrong. My palms were sweaty, my pulse racing. But this time I felt something else too, hope. The announcer introduced Ethan, and he walked out to the center of the field, holding a microphone. My breath caught in my throat as he glanced toward me in the stands, eyes full of emotion. "Before I start," he said, his voice steady and strong, "I need to thank someone. Someone who taught me what real strength looks like." The audience went silent. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear him continue. He looked right at me. "Mom, this one's for you." I had no idea what he was planning to do that day. The stadium lights burned bright again, but this time, my son was looking for me. The moment Ethan stepped up to the microphone, Time seemed to slow down. The last time I sat in bleachers like these, I'd walked away in tears. That night had crushed something inside me that I thought would never heal. But now, sitting among hundreds of parents and students, I felt something stir in my chest, a trembling mix of pride, fear, and disbelief. He stood tall in the center of the field, the same field where I once watched him chase victory for himself. Now, he was standing there for something greater. The crowd quieted as he adjusted the microphone. I gripped the edge of my seat, my breath caught in my throat. "Hi," he began, his voice echoing through the speakers. "My name's Ethan Parker, and I'm here because of football but also because of what it took away from me." A murmur ran through the audience. He smiled faintly, eyes scanning the stands until they found me. Our eyes locked, and for the first time in years, I didn't see arrogance or fear. I saw honesty. I saw my son. "When I was in high school," he continued, "I thought football made me special. I thought if people cheered loud enough, it meant I was somebody. But one night, during a game, I said something to the person who mattered most to me, something I can never take back." His voice trembled slightly, but he didn't look away from the crowd. "I called my mom nobody." A gasp rippled through the audience. I felt hundreds of eyes shift toward me. My cheeks flushed hot, but I didn't hide. For once, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt seen. He went on, his voice steadier now. "That night broke something between us. I thought I was untouchable. But life has a way of humbling you when you least expect it. I lost everything: the game, my friends, my confidence, but the hardest thing I lost was her trust. And somehow, she loved me through all of it anyway." His words filled the stadium, raw and unfiltered. Every sentence hit me like a wave. I pressed my hand to my mouth, tears streaming down my cheeks. I didn't care who saw. Ethan paused for a moment, swallowing hard before continuing. "I stand here today, not because I'm the best player or because I earned the most points. I'm here because I learned the most important lesson of my life, that love isn't measured by applause, and strength doesn't come from winning, it comes from getting back up when you've fallen." The audience sat silent, captivated. A few people nodded, others wiped at their eyes. The sincerity in his voice filled every corner of that vast field. He took a deep breath. "I owe everything I am to my mom, the woman who worked double shifts so I could chase my dreams, who sat through every game, who forgave me when I didn't deserve it. She's the reason I'm standing here today." He turned then, pointing toward me. "Mom, I used to be ashamed of you. Now I want the whole world to know you're my hero." The words broke me. My chest heaved as I covered my face, sobbing into my hands. The crowd erupted in applause. Cheers echoing through the stadium. Students stood up, clapping. Parents turned toward me, smiling with tears in their eyes. For the first time, the noise didn't hurt, it healed. Ethan waited for the crowd to quiet before finishing. "If anyone out there is lucky enough to have someone who loves you, no matter how many times you mess up, don't ever take them for granted. Because one day, you'll realize they were the reason you made it through it all." He stepped back from the microphone, his eyes finding mine again. He mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." I couldn't even respond. My heart was too full, my vision too blurred. All I could do was nod through tears, my hands clasped to my chest. When the ceremony ended, students and faculty swarmed him, congratulating and shaking his hand. But I stayed seated, frozen in the moment, trying to absorb what had just happened. Finally, he broke free from the crowd and jogged toward me. He looked different, lighter, freer. When he reached me, he didn't say anything. He just pulled me into his arms and held me tight. The same arms that once pushed me away now clung to me like he'd never let go again. "I meant every word," he whispered. "You were never nobody. You were everything." I clung to him, tears streaming down my face. Around us, the world cheered, but for me, time had stopped. It was just me and my son, both broken once but standing whole together again. When he finally pulled back, his eyes sparkled through his tears. "Don't leave yet," he said softly. "There's one more thing I want to do." But what he did after the game left me completely speechless. Ethan walked toward me holding his medal and tears in his eyes. The Sun was beginning to dip behind the stadium lights, casting a warm, golden glow over the crowd that lingered on the field. The ceremony had ended, but people were still chatting in small groups, laughing and taking photos. I was wiping my face with a tissue, trying to pull myself together, when I saw Ethan jogging toward me through the thinning crowd. He still had his medal around his neck, the gleaming symbol of his redemption, but his hands were shaking slightly. When he reached me, he stopped and took a deep breath. His voice was quiet, almost breaking. "Mom," he said, his eyes glistening. "I want you to have this." Before I could respond, he unclipped the medal and held it out to me. The gold caught the last bit of sunlight, flashing brightly between us. "Ethan," I whispered, shaking my head. "That's yours. You earned it." He smiled faintly. "No, Mom, you did. Every early morning you woke me up for practice. Every shift you worked so I could have shoes, equipment, lessons. Every time you believed in me when I didn't deserve it. This medal doesn't belong to me, it belongs to the person who never stopped showing up." My vision blurred instantly. "Sweetheart," I started, but my voice cracked. He gently reached forward and placed the medal around my neck. The crowd nearby noticed. A few people clapped softly, others just stood watching with warm smiles. I could hear someone whisper, "That's his mom." Cameras clicked, flashes went off, and before I knew it, a local journalist approached us, asking for a quick photo. I hesitated, but Ethan squeezed my hand and nodded. That photo, the one of him standing beside me, his arm around my shoulder, both of us crying, would end up everywhere within days. The caption read, "From calling her nobody to calling her his hero, Ethan Parker and his mother redefine forgiveness." When I saw it online that night, I couldn't stop staring. There we were, captured mid-tier, mid-redemption. For years, my name had only existed in the background of his story. Now, for the first time, it stood beside his. The next morning, I woke up to hundreds of messages on social media, people from all over sending words of encouragement. Mothers wrote to me, sharing their own stories of heartbreak and reconciliation. One message from a woman named Trisha stood out. "I was humiliated by my daughter in front of her friends once. Your story made me believe we can heal too. Thank you." Reading those words made something inside me ache in the best way. Maybe my pain hadn't been meaningless. Maybe it was meant to help others see that love, even when bruised, can still rebuild. Ethan spent that week preparing to move into the dorms at Oakwood. We packed boxes together, laughing as we argued over what he actually needed. "Do you really need 5 pairs of sneakers?" I teased. He smirked. "Yes, Mom. You never know when inspiration will strike." When we drove to the campus, the car was filled with quiet excitement. The last time I had seen him in a uniform, he'd been angry, lost. Now, he wore it with pride and peace. After unloading his things, he turned to me and said softly, "You know, Mom, I was thinking about starting a mentorship group here. For kids who've messed up, who need a second chance like I did." I smiled through the lump in my throat. "That sounds perfect for you." He nodded. "It's the least I can do. You showed me what grace looks like. Maybe I can pass that on." Before I could say anything, a student passing by recognized him. "Hey, you're that guy from the video, right? The one who gave the medal to his mom?" Ethan chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "Yeah, that's me." The boy smiled. "That was awesome, man." When the student walked away, I noticed something different in Ethan's expression. He wasn't soaking in the admiration this time. He just looked content, quietly proud. As I got ready to leave, he hugged me tightly. "I'll call every week," he promised. "I'll believe it when I see it." I joked, trying to keep the tears from spilling. He laughed. "Fair." Driving home alone, I turned on the radio, and to my surprise, the local station was talking about him. The host said, "A young athlete reminded us all what true sportsmanship and gratitude look like this weekend. If you haven't seen the story of Ethan Parker and his mother, go watch it. It'll restore your faith in people." I had to pull over because I couldn't see through my tears. That quiet drive home became one of the most peaceful moments of my life. That night, as I hung his medal on my wall, I realized it wasn't about victory or recognition. It was a reminder of everything we'd survived. The humiliation, the heartbreak, the lessons, and finally, the healing. But months later, a hidden letter reminded me just how far we'd come. While cleaning Ethan's old room, I found a folded letter addressed to me. It had been a few months since Ethan left for college, and the apartment felt different without him. Too quiet, too still. I had spent so many years wishing for silence, but now that it had finally come, I missed the sound of his laughter echoing down the hall, the thud of his cleats by the door, even the smell of his cologne lingering after he rushed out late for school. One Saturday morning, I decided to clean his room. It was something I'd been putting off not because it needed it, but because every corner carried a memory. The posters on the walls, the football trophies lined up on the shelf, the old worn-out jersey draped over the chair, all of it told the story of a boy who'd grown, stumbled, and risen again. As I dusted the bookshelf, I noticed a small, wrinkled envelope wedged between two old textbooks. My name was written on the front in Ethan's handwriting, slanted, uneven, but unmistakably his. My heart started pounding. I sat down on the edge of his bed, the sunlight pouring through the window catching the faded ink. The paper felt soft from age, like it had been handled many times before being hidden away. I unfolded it carefully. The first line made my breath catch. "Mom, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to say some things I don't have the courage to tell you yet." My eyes blurred instantly. I took a shaky breath and kept reading. "I know I hurt you that night at the game. I keep seeing your face in the stands, the way your smile disappeared when I said those words. I thought being embarrassed by you would make me fit in. I thought if I looked cool in front of them, I'd matter. But when you walked away, something inside me broke. I've never felt more like nobody than I did that night." Tears rolled down my cheeks. I pressed the paper against my chest, trying to breathe through the ache in my heart. He went on. "I didn't know how to say sorry. Every time I saw you after that, I wanted to. But I couldn't look at you without hating myself. So I started pretending. Pretending I didn't care. Pretending I was too busy or too tired. The truth is, I was ashamed. You gave up everything for me, and I threw it back in your face. You deserved better." I wiped my eyes and forced myself to keep reading, each word cutting deeper than the last. "I'm writing this now because I need to believe that one day, I'll be brave enough to tell you out loud. I don't know how to fix what I broke, but I promise I will. I'll make you proud again. I'll make you see me as your son, not your mistake." At the bottom of the letter, the words grew faint, the ink smudged in places as if his hand had trembled while writing. "You always said I'd understand love when I had to fight for it. I think I finally do. You fought for me even when I didn't deserve it. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be someone worthy of that kind of love. I'm sorry. Mom, I love you. E." By the time I finished reading, I was sobbing. The letter felt like a time capsule from a broken boy to the mother who had never stopped loving him. I held it to my heart, whispering his name through tears. "Oh, Ethan, you already did make me proud." I sat there for a long while, surrounded by the remnants of his teenage years, remembering everything: the fights, the laughter, the fear, and the forgiveness. That letter was proof of his transformation long before he'd found the courage to show it. He had started healing even when I thought he was lost. The next weekend, I drove to Oakwood to visit him. When I arrived at the campus, he was sitting under a tree near the field, his hair a little longer, his smile brighter. He stood up when he saw me and hugged me tight. "I found your letter," I whispered into his shoulder. He stiffened for a moment, then pulled back, eyes wide. "You did?" I nodded, smiling through tears. "You don't ever have to be sorry again, Ethan. You already gave me everything I needed." He swallowed hard, his voice thick with emotion. "I meant every word in that letter." "I know you did," I said softly. "And I kept every word in my heart." We sat on the bench for hours, talking about life, about forgiveness, about how pain can be the most honest teacher there is. Watching him laugh and speak with such kindness, I realized how far he'd come from the angry boy who once yelled at me under the stadium lights. He had become exactly what I always hoped he'd be, a man who led with empathy, not ego. I finally understood that the real victory wasn't his, it was ours. Looking back, I know now that love doesn't break, it bends and rebuilds. It's been 2 years since the night my son stood under those stadium lights and called me his hero. 2 years since the medal, the viral photo, the interviews, and all the noise that followed. Life quieted down again after that, thankfully so. These days, peace feels like the greatest victory of all. Ethan is 20 now, thriving at Oakwood University. He's studying sports education and coaching part-time at the youth center during his breaks. Every time he visits home, I see a new kind of confidence in him, not the loud, boastful pride he used to wear like armor, but something quieter, stronger, a humility born from understanding. He's no longer the boy who measured his worth in applause. He's the man who measures it in purpose. Sometimes, on weekends, we sit on the porch together drinking coffee. He tells me stories about the kids he mentors, about the shy ones who remind him of who he used to be, and the confident ones who need reminding that kindness matters. He laughs when he talks about them, but I can see how deeply he cares. Every story ends with him saying something like, "I just don't want them to make the same mistakes I did." And every time, I tell him, "Those mistakes are what made you the person who can guide them." He smiles at that, every time. As for me, I finally started selling my paintings. It began with an image I'd painted of that stadium night, but not the one where he humiliated me. This one showed the second stadium night, the one where he found me in the crowd, under the same blinding lights, but with different eyes. I called it, "The Moment He Saw Me." When I posted it online, people connected to it instantly. They said it reminded them of their own journeys with forgiveness, with love, with second chances. Soon after, a small art gallery reached out and asked to feature my work. I hesitated at first after years of working behind counters and cleaning offices. The idea of standing in front of my own art felt surreal. But Ethan insisted. "Mom," he told me, "you've spent your whole life helping other people chase their dreams. It's time you chase yours." So I did. And on the night of my first gallery showing, Ethan showed up with flowers, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit him right. When I caught him staring proudly at my paintings, I thought back to all the nights I'd sat in cold bleachers, cheering for him. The roles had reversed now, and it was beautiful. People often ask me how I forgave him, how I could ever move past that moment on the field when he called me nobody. I tell them the truth. Forgiveness wasn't one moment, it was hundreds of small ones. It was when he started saying thank you again, when he washed the dishes without being asked, when he apologized with tears in his eyes. When I realized that letting go of my anger didn't mean what he did was okay, it meant I refused to let it define either of us. Pain is part of love, I've learned. But love, real love, endures through pain. It transforms it. Every once in a while, I'll get messages from parents who watched our story online. Some say it gave them courage to reach out to their own kids. Others say it helped them forgive themselves for their mistakes. One mother wrote, "Your story saved my relationship with my son." I thought it was too late, but it wasn't. Reading messages like that still makes me cry. Because if all that hurt, all those sleepless nights, could bring light to someone else's darkness, then it was worth it. One evening, Ethan and I were sitting together, flipping through an old photo album. He pointed to a picture of himself at age 8, holding his first football trophy, his grin wide and gap-toothed. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think that was the happiest moment of my life." I smiled. "And now?" He looked at me with the same tender expression he'd worn that day on the college field. "Now I know it was the day you forgave me." My eyes stung as I reached for his hand. "And that was the day I got my son back," I whispered. He squeezed my hand gently. "You never lost me, Mom. I just had to lose myself a little to find you again." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the soft hum of evening. In that quiet moment, I realized that the past no longer haunted us, it had simply shaped us. Ethan had found his path, I had found my peace, and together, we had found our way back to love. As the sun set behind us, I thought of those words he once said in front of everyone, words that had cut me deeply but, in time, became the roots of our healing. "I was never nobody. I whispered to myself, smiling through tears. I was a mother who never stopped believing.